No, I'm all set. Mistake.
Okay, no problem. We just wanted to make sure. All right, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Kristie Puckett-Williams, and I am the statewide Campaign for Smart Justice Manager with the ACLU of North Carolina. If you've never heard the ACLU, where have you been for the last 101 years? Because we have been here fighting to protect the civil rights and civil liberties of all people living in the United States. And the ACLU of North Carolina has been working since 1965 to advance the goals. The Campaign for Smart Justice was created to address the mass incarceration of mostly Black, brown, and poor people in a racially disparate system. We work to disrupt and interrupt the over-policing and over-criminalization of Black, brown, and poor folks. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. 19 years have passed since the first prisoner arrived in Guantánamo Bay. Almost 800 men have passed through the cells of Guantánamo, originally presented to the public as an island outside the law, where terrorism suspects could be detained without process and tortured without restraint. For over a decade, North Carolina has played a major role in the CIA's use of torture, but there are few details from state officials about the program. Every branch of our government shares the responsibility for Guantanamo's ongoing damage to the human rights of detainees, our nation's reputation, and national security. The Obama administration sought to close Guantanamo, but failed. That administration considered transferring some detainees, most of who have been in prison for more than a decade, without charge or trial, to a prison in the United States. This was never the way to close Guantanamo. Importing indefinite detention and unfair military commissions would just create Guantanamo North on American soil, entrenching the prison's blight on our nation's core values. Closing Guantanamo requires ending indefinite detention without charge or trial, transferring detainees who have been cleared for transfer. Our federal courts routinely handle high-profile terrorism cases. If a prosecutor cannot put together a case against a detainee, there is no reason that person should continue to be imprisoned, whether in Guantanamo or in the United States. We are going to hear from people tonight who are experts on the use of torture by the US government, those who have worked to bring relief to those inside Gitmo, those who have fought hard to bring awareness to the tragedies inside and North Carolina's role in all of it, and from people who experience and live with racialized terror as part of their day-to-day lives. For example, Black and brown folks are overrepresented in North Carolina's prisons and jails, and our state's continued use of solitary confinement amounts to torture and disproportionately targets Black and brown folks with mental health disabilities. One of our panelists, Nancy Hollander, was an attorney for Mohamedou Ould Slahi, a Mauritanian who was detained at Guantanamo Bay without charge from 2002 to 2016 and was brutally tortured by the US government, including being force-fed seawater, sexually assaulted, repeatedly beaten, and subjected to mock executions. So thank you all for joining us tonight. This will be a heavy conversation, but we hope that it'll be an informative conversation. Please make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A feature, and we will have someone monitoring the chat for questions as well. And after our moderated discussion, we will take questions from the audience. So just to introduce our panelists really quickly, we have Ms. Nancy Hollander, who is a criminal defense attorney and human rights lawyer who represented Mr. Slahi. She currently represents a person imprisoned at Guantanamo. She was the lead counsel for Chelsea Manning in her military appeal and for her clemency request. Since 1983, Ms. Hollander has been a partner with Freedman, Boyd, Hollander, Goldberg, Urias, and Ward in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Hollander.
Thank you.
And we also have James Coleman, the John S. Bradway Professor of the Practice of Law at Duke University School of Law. Mr. Coleman is also the director of the Center for Criminal Justice and Professional Responsibility and the co-director of the Wrongful Convictions Clinic. Mr. Coleman also is a former commissioner of the North Carolina Commission of Inquiry on Torture. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us. And then we have Rob Thomas Jr., who is a community liaison for the Racial Justice Coalition of Asheville, a working scholar in incarceration, a racial justice practitioner, an activist, community engagement champion, a consultant, an innovative organizer, a social engineer, and my brother in the fight. Thank you for being here, Rob. Okay, we also have next my good friend, Frank Goldsmith, who is a mediator, an arbitrator, and a former civil rights lawyer in the Asheville, North Carolina area. He served as the co-chair of the North Carolina Commission of Inquiry on Torture, has represented several people detained at Guantánamo Bay, and people wrongfully convicted in North Carolina. He's also the former president and chair of the legal committee of the ACLU of North Carolina, and also serves in the Western chapter of the North Carolina ACLU, who is also a sponsor of tonight's event. And we finally, but not least, we have Christina Calger, who is a coordinator of North Carolina Stop Torture Now, a grassroots network seeking transparency and accountability for North Carolina's role in hosting CIA torture taxis that have enabled the kidnapping and disappearance of at least 49 Muslim men and women. Calger is a board member of the North Carolina Commission of Inquiry on Torture. Thank you all for joining us. So everybody, I'm going to ask the questions to all of you, and I want you to kind of set this stage for our audience tonight. A lot of people may not have been able to see the movie about Mr. Slahi's life. And so tell me why this subject of torture is an important one to be discussing from your vantage point in the work towards racial and social justice. And that's everyone. You gotta unmute yourself though.
Are you going to call on somebody? Or you just want us to speak up?
I'm gonna ask you to speak up.
Okay, so I'll go. You know, this is not an area in which I practice every day. You know, I am involved in the criminal justice system, but the you know, the problem with the use of torture is that I think it negates the rule of law, and where it is allowed to be used by the government without the constraints of law in any area, I think it becomes a threat to the rule of law in every area, and particularly in an area like the criminal justice system.
Yes, I will go next. You know, and I'm gonna paraphrase one of Martin Luther King's quotes, Martin Luther King Jr.'s quotes. You know, a threat to injustice permitted anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Again, that's paraphrasing of it. And I see so many similarities between a lot of the cases and instances that happen within places such as Guantánamo Bay and the overall environment of the criminal justice system when it comes to marginalized and poor people and people of color.
I'll go next.
I'm happy.
Oh,
Go ahead.
well, you know, very simply, torture is immoral, illegal under every circumstance in the US and internationally, and it doesn't work. So when people get tortured, it's either out of revenge or it's just a plain evil, or it's, as what happened in Chicago, cops just want to solve a murder and they pick up the first Black kid they see and torture him till he confesses. And I say Chicago because Richard Zuley, who was one of those cops in Chicago, became Captain Collins and the head of the interrogators for Mohamedou Ould Slahi. Mohamedou was tortured. There was no point in it. My other client, Ibrahim El Nasri, was tortured in the black sites. Torture, as Jim said, has no place in a democracy, has no place in the rule of law, and has no place anywhere, anytime.
Well, I'll chime in on that. And Rob quoted Martin Luther King. I would like to quote one of my favorite authors, To put this in some historical context, and that's really what I would like to do, is what this episode in Guantánamo Bay and elsewhere, because it occurred elsewhere, says about America. And Ibram X. Kendi, who's one of my favorite authors, has written this. He says that America is a land in denial. It has been a massacring nation that said it cherished life, a slave-holding nation that claimed it valued liberty, a hierarchical nation that declared that it valued equality, a disenfranchising nation that branded itself a democracy, a segregated nation that styled itself separate but equal, an excluding nation that boasted of opportunity for all. A nation is what it does, not what it originally claimed to be. And he concludes by saying, often a nation is precisely what it denies itself to be. And we have well-meaning people, progressives, who think that what we did and are doing in Guantanamo was terrible, and say this is just an aberration in our nation's history, and it will surely be condemned by the judgment of history, just as the internment of the Japanese in World War II was condemned. And I think they're wrong. Our program of kidnapping and torturing and imprisoning people without any evidence is no aberration. It's consistent with how America has conducted itself as a nation in many respects. And it's inconsistent with what America professes, but not with how it acts. Americans talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk.
Okay, come on, you preaching tonight, Frank. And that's seriously, because when I think about, you used a very strong word. We use this in the setting of pretrial, when we talk about kidnapping, when we see folks just disappeared from their communities, being held on these large, bonds that they can't afford. And it's the same concept, right? Like people are just disappeared and disconnected from their communities through this use of state violence, including torture. Christina, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just, I think to underscore what others have already said, that the systematic use of torture by the CIA and the Pentagon in the post 9/11 period was aimed at a particular population of people. It was not aimed at white Christian people. It was aimed at a population of Muslim people, most of them Black and brown. And unfortunately, it's part of a pattern of US foreign policy, which targets people, poor people in less wealthy countries for things like the Contra War in Central America, or the drone killings in Asia and the Middle East, where lots of innocent people are mowed down. And I mean, I see that the fact that the United States government has gotten away with this so far as one more reason why peoples around the world might look at the United States and say, that's the greatest danger to my safety and to peace in my country, regardless of what the United States might try to say.
Thank you for that. And Christina, I'm going to stick with you. How has torture been used, to Frank's point, historically in the United States? And what is North Carolina's role in its use?
Well, I think, Frank has summed it up pretty well here already. It's undeniable that torture has been a regular component of the fabric of this country. It's been used for coercion and punishment in the United States since our founding, and that's especially to preserve institutions of slavery and the white supremacist social order. Whippings, brutal whippings, rape, the use of tools and devices to inflict terrible pain, all as punishment to people who would try to escape slavery, or just to maintain the dominant social order. There's no question that that's an integral part of our history. And then, if you look a little farther down the line, there is medical experimentation. So we have the case of Dr. Sims in the mid-19th century, who did gynecological surgery on enslaved Black women without anesthesia, while the white women who were his patients got anesthesia. And later on in the 20th century, the experimentation on Black men at Tuskegee would fit right in to this context. So you have antibiotics readily available, yet these men were monitored for decades to see how the disease would ravage them. Lynching, the whole history of lynching, mainly targeting Black Americans, but also Latinos and Native Americans to some extent. So the post 9/11 outbreak of US government terror has some particular aspects, but it certainly wouldn't be right to say that the United States was free of torture until that time. But I think it is important to say that in the aftermath of World War II, the United States played a leading role in taking the revulsion that the whole world felt about torture and medical experimentation and genocide conducted by the Nazis, and the way that Nazis treated their prisoners, and channeling that into the establishment of an important global human rights regime. And that was, particularly exemplified by the Geneva Conventions, which governed the treatment of prisoners, the humane treatment of prisoners in the time of war, the Nuremberg Code, which said that medical personnel may not conduct human experimentation without voluntary consent by the prisoners, or the people rather. And that this consensus that the world came to in the wake of World War II about human rights reached in some ways its high point with the establishment of the Convention Against Torture, which the United Nations adopted in 1984, which President Reagan enthusiastically signed in 1988, and which was ratified by the US Senate in 1994. So in that context, it's particularly tragic that we then have the United States government, which after the attacks of 2001, so publicly violated the Convention Against Torture and essentially abandoned its commitment to torture accountability. And so just to briefly say how that happened, the United States established these 10 secret prisons, these black sites, over a period from 2002 to 2008, where it took its war on terror, high value and intermediate value prisoners, and it held them there secretly and indefinitely. This was in 6 different countries scattered across the globe, of which Cuba was only one. And that's outside of Guantanamo, right? That's in addition to Guantanamo. These were secret torture sites. And we know of at least 119 men who were held at these dark sites, these black prisons, and were tortured, brutally, both psychologically and physically, often for periods of years with their families and their not knowing where they were and no access to lawyers or the Red Cross. So it's in addition, the United States then also ferried dozens of prisoners to third countries, allied security forces like Morocco, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan would torture prisoners on behalf of the CIA. And in all of that, North Carolina played a very important role by providing the aviation infrastructure, the aircraft.
So they provided the airplanes that taxied the people to these black sites, whether Gitmo or other sites. Is that what we're saying?
That's right. So an airplane would take off from Smithfield or Kinston, North Carolina, and it would travel overseas. After refueling, it would land in Sweden or in the Gambia or in some other country and pick up a prisoner from local security forces. And then a team of black-clad ninjas operating for the CIA would silently strip the clothes off the prisoner, beat him, photograph him naked, forcibly, involuntarily drug him through an anal suppository, which was experienced as rape, and dress him in a diaper, a jumpsuit, goggles, hood, blindfold, and strap him to the floor of a plane. And then he would be taken to a third country where he would be tortured either at a CIA black site or by an allied security force.
Ms. Nancy, I saw your hand up. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I wanted to add two things. One is, I mean, what Frank said is so eloquent. I usually have a very simple way of saying it, which is we've never been a great country. You know, we started by killing Indians, and then there were the slaves, and then there was every minority that came here that was not white Protestant. And when the founders said all men are created equal, they did not mean what we say they mean now. They meant all property owning, you had to have a lot of property owning Protestant men. That's what they meant. So to say this country was founded on anything other than that is just a lie. But as to the black sites, you know, my client Ibrahim al-Nasri was in those black sites. And on a slightly more positive note, so that we're not all, you know, delving into this, how horrible this is, and it is. We won 2 cases in the European Court of Human Rights for him against 2 countries. And the countries had to pay his family 200,000 euros, which they got in Saudi. Those countries were also ordered to tell the US that it could not get the death penalty. The US could care less what that court says, however, and ordered that they have a fair trial. Those things haven't happened, of course, but one of the things I believe my client wants is accountability. He wants the world to know what happened to him. And we are doing that. We did it in those 2 countries. We're about to do it in a 3rd country where we believe we will get the same result. We also have a case in the International Criminal Court where he's a victim. That case can't go forward right now without our risking being accused of espionage and our foreign lawyers having all of their bank accounts frozen, but we're hoping that will change and we can go forward with those cases, or else we'll just do it anyway and risk it. We also have a case in the UK, which I just want to mention because it's really interesting. The Parliament in the UK found that MI6, it's their CIA essentially, had interrogated over 100 people when they should have known that they were being tortured by the US. So they probably didn't interrogate them directly. It was probably by feeding questions to the CIA. We don't know for sure. We believe this happened in Guantánamo because although the countries' names are classified and I can't confirm or deny anywhere that my client was, except that they were in Guantánamo in 2003. That one has come out. And there's another place, codenamed Cobalt, where we believe that they did this. We have a case now in front of the tribunal in the UK. The sole purpose of that tribunal is to investigate abuses of the secret services. Would that we had something like that here, but we don't, of course. But we have brought a petition there on his behalf. So we're working around the world for at least for people to understand that this continues to happen. And it is true that it has happened throughout our history. We've also trained soldiers in other countries at the School of the Americas and have trained other torturers around the country and the world, in addition to all the torture we've done around the world. But we are making some progress with some of these courts that at least will make it clear to people. And if you haven't seen the Mauritanian, Mohamedou's movie, or read his book, the movie, we hope, will begin to change the conversation. It's being shown all over the world, and we want that conversation to change. Anyway, I just wanted to, sometimes it at least helps me to think that we're making a little bit of progress.
Yeah, we got to keep hope alive. Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to Jim. what is the war on terror paradigm, and how does that allow for like these black holes or Guantanamo Bay to even exist?
Okay, so it's a rationale that allows the government to avoid accountability for acts like the ones that Christina described our government engaged in connection with Gitmo. It legitimizes the systematic use of violent, extrajudicial, warlike methods against defenseless people. It ignores or reinterprets human rights laws and the rule of law generally, so that it no longer becomes a limit on the government. It assumes that the people against whom we are warring are stateless enemies who therefore have no rights. And it justifies the use of violence like torture through either the logic of law or the reinterpretation of law. This, you know, the notion is that this is necessary in order to protect the national security of the country. That was our rationale after 9/11, that abiding by norms of law would not have been sufficient to protect us from the danger that these stateless enemies represented. And therefore, we had to engage in these extrajudicial activities. I think that it is it's accepting in effect, the defeat of law to feel that you've got to rationalize what you do to protect the society by acting in a lawless way. I think that we see the paradigm now being exercised outside of the areas of terrorism. I mean, I think that's what was going on in Portland, for example, this summer, where we sent in the federal law enforcement agencies to protect, it's sort of ironic, to protect the courthouse in Portland at night from protesters. So, you know, we send out folks dressed up like military people with military weapons and military equipment. And then, we claim that the people against whom this is being done are enemies. They're others, and primarily, they're Black and brown people. And then any violence that breaks out is attributed to those people. The irony that I was going to mention is that on January 6th, where you had a much more serious attack on property, as well as representatives of our country, the administration was reluctant to engage in activities that, even ones that are authorized by normal law to provide protection.
Thank you for that, Jim. Thank you for making that connection to the mindsets that have to exist in order for this lawlessness, or the moving of the goalposts is how I like to describe it. Like, they continue to recalibrate and reinvent what power looks like in order to maintain that power. So Nancy, back to you really quickly. Mohamedou is your client. We learned about him in the film for those of us who got to watch him. What can you tell us about him? How is he now? And most specifically, he has said that he does not have his full freedom. And so tell us, what does that mean?
Well, Mohamedou's living in Mauritania, which is where he's from, in West Africa, Northwest Africa. But it took 3 years after he got out before he even got a passport. And we've been struggling to get him visas. Fortunately, he got a visa to South Africa, where the the film was made, and he and I got to go and watch some of it getting made, which was a big event for both of us. Although pretty horrifying to see Guantanamo recreated on the shores of Cape Town. But he can't get, he wants to get a visa to go to the UK. He's been denied by the Home Secretary, who, based on Wikipedia, that's what she wrote, said that he was, he had joined Al-Qaeda. Of course, he joined Al-Qaeda at the same time we did in 1990 to 92. But we're appealing that. He's trying to get a visa to Germany. His wife, who's an American lawyer named Kitty, lives in Germany and lives in Berlin and works in Berlin. And we're trying for family reunification in Germany. He also has a brother who's now a German citizen, Yahli, and he has a baby, Ahmed, who lives with his mother in Germany. They're in Mauritania right now, but there's no work for her in Mauritania. There's no, I mean, he never wants to leave it permanently. It's his home. It's where his family is. But when he says he's not a free man, that's what he means. If he were a free man, he could travel. He could travel like everyone else does. And now, as he said in the documentary, which I also encourage you to watch, My Brother's Keeper, which is about his relationship with a guard named Steve Wood, who's become a very close friend and has converted to Islam. He says in that he's just now in a bigger prison. The prison is now basically Mauritania. So that's what he means when he's not free. How's he doing? You know, he's doing pretty well. He's just written a new book that just came out, the Ohio University Press, the actual true story of Ahmed and Zarga, about a Bedouin who goes on an epic journey to find a lost camel. It's a wonderful book. It's just funny and interesting, and you'll learn everything you ever wanted to know about Bedouin superstitions. Mohamedou is a Bedouin. And he's, you know, this movie is happening. He's busy now. When he's not so busy, he gets, you know, down. And Steve Xenakis, is a psychiatrist, a retired brigadier general, and a truly wonderful man who went to spend some time with Mohamedou. The ACLU paid for it, thank goodness. And he went to Mauritania. And Steve says he will not fully recover until he's been out as long as he was in. So we got a ways to go, but he's doing well.
Well, that's really good to hear. You know, just hearing all the things that he endured, and for as long as he endured them, it's just a blessing that he's still here with us to tell his side of the story. Frank, you represented several folks that were detained at Guantanamo Bay. Weren't most of the detainees guilty of war crimes, or at least attacked the United States forces?
Well, you would think so from what the administration told us, because President Bush assured us repeatedly that these were the worst of the worst, if you remember that phrase. He said these people were among the most dangerous, best trained, vicious killers on the face of the earth. He told us that these were people who were picked off the battlefield in Afghanistan, trying to kill American forces, fighting American forces. Vice President Cheney said that they were terrorists and bomb makers, facilitators of terror, members of the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Condoleezza Rice said that Guantanamo held hundreds of dangerous people who were picked up on battlefields in Afghanistan because of their associations with Al-Qaeda. And those statements were all false. And the best evidence that they were false is that of the roughly 779 men, all Muslim, who were over time held at Guantanamo Bay, the Bush administration released without any judicial review, without any court telling them to, something like 530 of them. Some of them died in custody. President Obama inherited 242 when he took office. Some more of those died Some won their habeas cases, but continued to be held in captivity because the Obama administration would appeal. And so we're down to about 40 of those 779 men. And some of those, the government has long conceded, are not and never were terrorists. The Uyghurs, the Chinese Muslims, for example, were cleared for release by sometime in 2003, I believe. Most of them were, and yet continued to be held. And of those 779 men, a handful, fewer than 10, either have been or are proposed to be prosecuted for any kinds of crimes. And so it's telling that after over 19 years of detention, the government has managed to charge and try and convict only very few of those men that it brought to that base. So if they were all the worst of the worst, why is that so? It's certainly not the case that the United States doesn't know how to prosecute people and imprison them, and especially people of color. We've done that for our whole history. So why has that not occurred with Guantanamo? And I suggest that it's because these people are not who we were told they were. And the reason for that, there are a number of reasons why the government statements were false. First of all, the United States forces captured only about 1 in 20 of the detainees in Guantanamo. The others were sometimes bought and paid for from tribesmen that were motivated by bounties that we paid. We dropped leaflets all over the country during and after our invasion, encouraging people to turn in suspected terrorists for money. And there was one leaflet in the Pashto language that said they could get wealth and power beyond your dreams. And it goes on to say, you can receive millions of dollars for helping the anti-Taliban forces catch Al-Qaeda and Taliban murderers, enough to take care of your family, your village, your tribe for the rest of your life, and so on. And so a lot of these poor villagers were unable to resist these lucrative temptations that we provided, and they turned in their personal enemies or their strangers. They turned in Arabs that they may have encountered that they didn't know. And these people were seized from all over, not from the battlefield, from their homes, their places of work. Most of them were seized in Pakistan, not where the battles were being fought in Afghanistan. Most of them never were on a battlefield, and most of them never were determined to have committed any hostile act against the US or its allies. And so the politicians and the pundits just misstated the facts. And of the 5 clients that I represented over time from 2007 to 2014, not one of them was ever charged with anything. No allegation that they had committed a war crime, no allegation that they had personally done any harm to Americans or to our allies. It's just that the government held them until it pleased the government to send them back on a whim. And it was entirely an arbitrary process. So no, they were not all guilty. Very, very few of them were guilty of anything. It's shameful.
Yeah, yes, but it's also reminds me, and Rob, I'm gonna tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the war on drugs, where we offer people impossible deals. Like you snitch or sign this affidavit on this person so that you don't get life in prison. Who doesn't take that deal? Like, who wants to go to prison for life, right? And so you and I have both spent time in a cage. And your dad, Rob Sr., is currently in a cage. He has contracted COVID while he's been in that cage. How does Mohamedou's lack of freedom and all of the experiences that we know of formerly and currently incarcerated people, how does that intersect with our experience? How does the experience of the folks in Guantanamo intersect with the experience of people right here in North Carolina who are locked up?
I think that the legal definition of the word torture shows and proves that it still exists in our carceral system today, physically and mentally. And I guess I'll give you a couple incidents, as far as myself, and this was when I was 16 and I first went into the prison system. My first 11 days there, I got in a fight with a white gentleman. He stood up in the middle of the day room and said, I'm not afraid of any of you. And then he proceeded to say the N-word. And me and him got in a fight in the restroom. And I went back and I remember sitting back down in the day room and like pretending like I'm watching TV. And So then he stumbles off the hallway out of the bathroom, and the guards see him bleeding and stuff. And he told them that I did it, and he told them that I was racist. And I was at the Western Youth Institution. The Western Youth Institution had 16 floors. The 14th floor was regular segregation. 15th floor was medical. 16th floor was a lot more serious segregation. I just put it that way. And so they took me to the 14th floor. And upon getting on the 14th floor, I'm handcuffed behind me. Immediately, the officers start beating me. And then, they take me into my room. There's nothing in my room, just steel. And they strip me naked and put the handcuffs back on me and beat me some more. I can't even stand at this point. They've got me like lifted because I'm not the biggest individual. So it's one on each side of me. They got me like lifted up against these metal windows. And, they're beating me. And then they left me in this room with no clothing, no mattress, no pillow, and no food for 3 days. And, that was my introductory to the prison system. Like I said, my first 11 days in there. And like, I've been through so much more. I've seen people get their eyes knocked out by guards. The whole culture and the whole environment where it's like what some of our fellow panelists have explained, to where they feel justified in doing it because we're looked at as the scum of society. And then us, we've already been convicted, of whatever our crime may be. So they feel completely justified in anything it is that they do. And my father, speaking to his situation, he has not had any infractions while incarcerated. I still look at him as an amazement and a wonder today because I couldn't achieve that. He hasn't had any infractions since he's been incarcerated. He contracted coronavirus and went to the hospital, almost died. And the prison system, they tried to hide all this information from me. It was me and 3 other people that was working around the clock to get information. And then we had stumbled upon one of the inmates called me and they told me what hospital he was being held at, what hospital they suspected. So then we did some research and we called the hospital and kind of played like a bait and switch role where we took different roles where we would call in me, Noel Nickel, Amy, Cantrell with Beloved, and my mother. And we did this, and then we got connected to a couple of nurses that were willing to like secretly give us information about my father's condition. And, I had a long conversation, one of them where they were saying, let's put him on a ventilator. And it was like a 68% chance that he would not make it. 68% of the people that make it to that stage do not make it. Well, anyway, he makes it through that miraculously after being on a ventilator for a little bit over 2 weeks. And then they hurriedly send him to CP, which is Central Prison, solitary confinement. And, looking at the UN's rules or Mandela's rules, I guess they're called, on the incarceration of inmates, or kind of a guideline on incarceration, it supposedly prohibits that confinement of more than 15 days within solitary confinement should not happen. There's a whole host of issues that this brings about. Anxiety, stress, depression, hopelessness, anger, irritability, hostility, panic attacks, worsening of pre-existing mental health issues, hypersensitivity to sounds and smells, problems with attention, concentration, and memory, hallucinations that affect all of the senses, paranoia, poor impulse control, social withdrawal, outbursts of violence, psychosis, fear of death, self-harm, and suicide, to name a few. There are more. And like, I have experienced long-term solitary confinement on a couple occasions. Long-term is 6 months or more. And I've even experienced it after they changed the law right before I was released. They started changing some of the laws on solitary confinement, and they were already identifying loopholes. Like, I was not supposed to be in solitary confinement on administrative segregation, meaning that if you haven't been proven guilty, you're not supposed to stand there over 15 days. Well, what they would do to get around that is they would hold you in there and they wouldn't even charge you with anything. And then what they could do is potentially let you out and back on the yard for a day and then put you right back in there. But for me, I don't even know how they did it. Like, they had me in there for 90 days up until I transferred to a regular camp, like 2 months before I was released. I was in there for 90 days off of, no write-up, no charges, there was no type of disciplinary procedure or process that I was waiting to go through. It was pretty much out of spite because they felt like I was doing some stuff that I guess that they could not prove. And I could go into detail about so many similarities between Mohamedou's story. What I will say, his is a lot more extreme in some cases, and a lot of a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters that experience it, to where it's they have them more isolated. There's even less accountability, if you will. And that's the issue within our prison systems. There's no accountability, and it's the same culture of like law enforcement out here with the correctional officers. They're not going to tell on each other. And so when you have no evidence or no proof that this officer done beat you down and they've hid you in segregation until you healed with no outside communication, you don't really have a chance at all in proving that anything was wrongly done to you in the first place, because this is your word against how many other officers they decide to put against you.
And we've also been quite comfortable in this country with adding on punishment after a person has been punished, right? And so like once you're incarcerated, whatever comes your way, you're subjected to all of that, right? So a judge don't order you to any of that, but those things happen. So when we think about the stimulus check and the Republicans in Wisconsin saying folks in prison don't need stimulus checks. Now you done added extra punishment on, and Congress said people can get a check, and just because they locked up, they can't get a stimulus check? Like that's the type of attitude, though, that those simple things that we gloss over lead to us turning a blind eye to the continued torture of mostly Black, brown people in this country. Ooh, that was a lot, Rob, to think about a 16-year-old in the first 11 days inside. That's a lot. So Frank, I'm gonna come back to you and ask, how could the detainees challenge the basis for their imprisonment? Was there a way, like if we know they weren't going to trial, they weren't charged with anything, I mean, so like how did y'all argue on their behalf? And when President Obama came into office, did things get better?
Okay, so that's a good question, or maybe a series of questions, and I'll try to answer it. First of all, there was no initial method by which a detainee could challenge his detention. But in 2004, the U.S. Supreme Court rendered 2 cases. By the way, they picked Guantánamo because they believed, the Bush administration did, that it was outside of the scope of jurisdiction of U.S. courts. But it was a place, a part of Cuba over which we had totally exclusive control. And so in 2004, the US Supreme Court held that federal courts did indeed have jurisdiction over what went on in Guantanamo. And they, in a separate decision, also held that a detainee, and this was not a Guantanamo detainee, but somebody else who had been picked up and was being held in Charleston at a military facility, that they had at least some right to be able to challenge the basis for their detention. And so what Congress did, because of those 2 decisions in 2005, they set up this system of what they called Combat Status Review Tribunals, CRSTs. And these were kangaroo courts. They were designed to be kangaroo courts. They were. Just to give you some example, they would review about 100 cases per month. That's over 3 per day. And the detainee was presumed guilty. He could not be represented by a lawyer. He could not see the evidence against him or know the exact basis for his detention. He was provided a non-lawyer military officer who was his personal representative. And that personal representative was obligated to tell the military authorities what the detainee said, if it could lead to his continued detention. And so not surprisingly, it was a rubber stamp for what the military had already decided. Then in 2008, the US Supreme Court rendered another decision, Boumediene, and that established that the detainees had the right to habeas corpus. And so as Nancy and I did, we challenged the legal basis for our clients' detentions under habeas corpus, but it was not ordinary habeas corpus. It was so restrictive, and I'm sure Nancy can speak to this probably better than I can, but First of all of the evidence was classified. And so in order to see the evidence, we had to get a security clearance, secret or top secret. I had a top secret security clearance. And it meant that because it was classified, all the evidence had to be housed in what they called a secure facility, which was in Crystal City, just outside of, near the Pentagon in DC, basically. And we made multiple trips there to see the evidence against our clients. If we went to see our clients in Guantanamo, or when we did, and we took notes, and the movie illustrates some of this, we had two choices. We could either turn the notes of our conversations with our clients over to the authorities to review, called a privilege review, and then they would give them back to us, or we could seal them in an envelope and they would be mailed to the secure facility, and we would have to go to DC to see our notes. And because all of the evidence was classified, it meant that when we, for example, we want to file a motion in the case, and the motion had to refer to the evidence, it was all classified evidence, we would have to physically go to DC to be able to prepare that motion and file it. Then when the government would file a response to our motion, we would have to go back to DC to see the motion, and then the response. And then when the judge decided the motion, we'd have to go back to DC in order to see what the judge had ruled. And there were, I won't get into all the details, but we were under a protective order. We could not, as Nancy said earlier, you can't confirm or deny that you've seen information, classified information, that either confirms or contradicts information in the public domain. We couldn't take any notes out of the secure facility. We couldn't share with our clients the factual allegations against that client. And anything we learned from our client was presumed to be classified. So, for example, if a client told us he had been tortured, I couldn't tell you that the client had been tortured. That's classified. It comes from the client. Our interviews were monitored, at least by video, and a lot of us suspected by audio as well. It was extremely onerous. It was extremely expensive. I don't speak Pashto. My clients didn't speak any language that I spoke. So we had to hire interpreters. They charged $1,400 a day, including their travel days, and $200 an hour if we had to get them to translate a letter. And so that was the process that we had to follow. And then in court, once you got into court, hearsay evidence was admissible. This is unlike the case in any other civilian court in America. You know, that freely hearsay evidence is admissible. That includes uncorroborated, anonymous reports that have multiple levels of hearsay. Standing alone, they can be a sufficient basis to uphold the detention of a client. And we still were not permitted to share any classified information with the clients. We would, even despite our security clearances, we would be given classified documents from which large portions had been redacted, blacked out. You saw that in the movie, if you saw the movie. It was sufficient for the government to prove its case by preponderance of the evidence. And think about that. In the criminal system, the government has to prove, before it can lock you up for the rest of your life or kill you or even sentence you to a year in prison, it has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're guilty of something. Here, the government just had to prove by preponderance of the evidence that the detainee was lawfully seized in the first place. And that's sufficient to permit imprisonment indefinitely, perhaps for the rest of the detainee's life. And so that's the kind of environment that we engaged in. And so you ask about, did things change under the Obama administration? And I will have to tell you, at least from my perspective, I could not tell any difference between the Bush administration and the Obama administration in terms of how these cases were handled by the government lawyers. For example, the Obama administration filed motions and insisted that they should be able to submit classified documentary evidence to the court directly without showing it to us. It's called ex parte, an in-camera submission of evidence, not just for the court to determine whether some of it should be redacted, but for the court to consider in determining the outcome of the case, whether to hold our client for life or not. The Obama administration argued that, unsuccessfully, by the way, that a detainee should not be able to see his own statements if they were derived from a classified document. And so it was not the full and fair federal trial that we are used to in America. It's special rules applied for these men.
Thank you for that, Frank. So we're almost out of time, but Nancy, I want you to, not out of time, but for me to ask you questions. We'll get to the audience's questions here in just a second. But Nancy, there's still 40 people in Guantanamo Bay right now. Are they being tortured? And I don't mean like, I know like being locked in a cage is torture in itself, but I mean, are they being waterboarded, shocked, beaten? Are those types of things still happening to those 40 people?
No, those things aren't happening to those people. And I agree with you, solitary is torture. But that aside, no. Mohamedou was actively tortured until he signed these fake confessions in 2004. So by the time we got there in 2005, he was not being tortured anymore. He spent most of the time from then on, in fact, all of the time until he got out in solitary. He had his own little guard force, and they became friends because they were all in there together. And these 18-year-olds didn't care much for the government either. Some of them, including Steve Wood, and I encourage you to see that documentary. He's a white kid from Oregon. They became very close friends. Steve is now Muslim. He has converted to Islam as a result of meeting Mohamedou. But no, they're not being tortured anymore. But they're also not being treated. So Ibrahim al-Nasri, who, according to our experts, Dr. Crosby, has the worst case of PTSD she's ever seen in a torture patient, is not being treated for any of this. So it's just progressing to get worse after all those years of torture.
Thank you so much. So we do have quite a bit of chatter in our chat box. I see some of our panelists, thank you, have already been answering some of the questions that have come into the Q&A. And let me get to the ones that are still open. Adrian Sandler asks, what is the status of the rules that Rumsfeld introduced?
Well, those were the torture rules. Really, those just applied, I think, to Mohamedou and a guy named Al-Qahtani. And nobody's doing that anymore. So.
Yeah, I think when Obama took office, one thing he did do was to rescind the so-called torture memos, the legal authority that permitted these enhanced interrogation techniques that were concocted by John Yoo and some other people in the Bush administration.
Right.
So is there any openness from the Biden administration? I know it's only been 50-something days, but have y'all heard anything? Do you have any from the Biden administration for dealing with these torture issues, or for not just so much even the torture issues, but for the 40 people who are currently there?
I don't know. I have not heard anything from the Biden administration about that, other than President Biden saying that he wanted to close Guantanamo. And they should. I mean, even if, let's assume all 40 people were guilty of something and could be prosecuted, there are plenty of places in the territorial U.S. where we could house them. It is incredibly expensive to keep Guantanamo open and running for those people who are being detained there.
And Frank, you know what? To your point, I read in some report that it costs $11 million per year per person to keep folks in Guantanamo, y'all. $11 million per year per person.
Could I just say that the administration announced yesterday, I guess, that they were going to do a review of the prison, and that Biden wants to close it before he leaves office. But there are two problems: what to do with the 40 people who are there, because they can't be brought to the U.S., and then whether Biden is going to and whether Congress would be willing to engage in the political fight to close it, because, obviously it would become a major political issue in the next election. So.
Thank you, Jim. Did you have anything to add, Christina?
Yeah, just that I think an important first step would be for the Biden administration to restart the office in the State Department that is charged with transferring prisoners who are cleared for release. And as someone said, several prisoners have been cleared for release there for many years already and are just sitting there. And so the State Department office was dismantled by the Trump administration. And one thing that Biden should do right off the bat is set that office back up so that somebody there can start looking for how to get those people out of Guantanamo and to some hopefully meaningful measure of freedom so that they can live the rest of their lives.
I think that's one of the things that he announced that he was going to do. He's going to sign a executive order sometime in the next week or so to do that, among other things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good. So another question that we have, someone seeking some advice. It says, just this week, I learned of Latin American visitors being tortured when going through customs at the Miami airport. A Peruvian man with a passport and a tourist visa upon arrival from Peru paid a fee at the customs desk, then was asked to go in a room and take his clothes off, where he found other men in their underwear. They were hosed with cold water, then beaten, detained without food or water. I'm working on helping this man and exposing this ongoing torture at the Miami airport. Any advice on who to contact on this?
Don't know.
All right, Jerry. The panel don't have any suggestions for you. Oh, sorry. Maybe we'll think of something and chew on that for a little while, because that's pretty heavy. By the time we get to maybe 8:25, somebody might have a suggestion of maybe who to contact about what's happening at the Miami airport. So this question is for you, Christina. Stop Torture Now has asked the Johnston County, North Carolina Board of Supervisors to take action to prevent the use of the Smithfield Airport as torture taxis. Under the U.S. federal system, local governments have unique criminal jurisdiction to prevent the CIA and agents of the federal government from engaging in abuses of basic human rights like torture or extrajudicial disappearances. Do you think that racial attitudes of the Johnston County Board of Supervisors played a role in their refusal to take action to prevent the use of North Carolina airfields as torture taxis?
I think that's easily part of it. It's an all-white Board of Commissioners, has been for a long time. And several successive versions of that Board of Commissioners have been asked to take responsibility for the torture taxis that are still based at their airport and still operating with complete impunity. No one knows outside of the US government, at least, what they're doing. They could be transporting prisoners, to this day, we don't know. And yes, the county commissioners in Johnston should have exercised oversight over that. And they have several times refused to do that or to apologize for the kidnappings that have occurred on their watch. But in the absence of them taking action, really the state of North Carolina should be doing something. And I think it is outrageous that Governor Cooper has known about this problem since 2007 at the very latest, or maybe 2005 when the New York Times exposed it, that Aero Contractors was operating out of the Johnston County Airport to kidnap people for the CIA to be tortured and held indefinitely somewhere secret. Governor Cooper, Attorney General Cooper, then Governor Cooper has very conscientiously refused to say a single word in public and has refused to refer the matter to the U.S. Department of Justice for prosecution. Jim and Frank and their fellow commissioners were involved in a non-governmental commission of inquiry, the North Carolina Commission of Inquiry on Torture, which considered the problem for 2 years and thought carefully about what laws in North Carolina our Attorney General and our governor could use to try to get at this problem of the CIA using our public airports to commit these human rights abuses. And they made very good recommendations in a report called Torture Flights, which is available publicly on the internet. And what they said was that the state of North Carolina really has no excuse for doing nothing. They may not be able to prosecute for all the crimes committed by aero contractors, but certainly the kidnapping statute that we have is a ready-made tool.
Yeah. Thank you. Jennifer Bailey asked, is there a role for healthcare intervention for the 40 folks who are, I'm going to assume it's for the folks who are still there, who aren't being cared for? Is there a role to intervene? Oh,
They're not going to be able to intervene. I mean, they're under military control, unless they have, lawyers who bring in their healthcare experts, as we have with Ibrahim and as other lawyers have done, had their experts come in, experts who've examined them. And the idea is not to care for them. The idea is to get them out. 6 of those people have been cleared for release, one since 2009. 2009, he was cleared for release. There is no reason why those people cannot go home now. The State Department sets up the system. They find homes for them where they're safe, where they want to go, and they get out. The other quote, forever prisoners, we don't have forever prisoners in our justice system. People who've never been charged with any crime have been there this long. Seriously, I mean, they're never going to get charged. How can the government say they're too dangerous to release if they can't even find a crime to charge them with? They have to get out. And that just leaves the small group of people who have been charged. And again, if there's not evidence to try them in a federal court, then they have to be released. Their cases have to be dismissed and they have to leave. And if they do have evidence that would hold up in a federal court, then they have to be tried or enter pleas or whatever it is they want to do under the normal due process rules. But it's not even clear that due process applies. The confrontation clause doesn't apply. If speedy trial applies, then they all get out because it's been so long. That'd be the easiest way, I suppose. But we have to focus on getting these folks out, locking the door to Guantanamo. It's not going to save the rest of the world. It's not going to deal with all the refugees around the world, even in refugee camps that we've never even heard of. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who are in places, the Rohingyas, who are now being moved to an island that's going to fall into the ocean. It's going to be one of the biggest humanitarian crises and disasters to come, when the ocean literally encompasses that island, which it will. And yet, if we can get these people out of Guantanamo, we've at least made some progress.
Freedom is the key. So this question is for you, Nancy. Were there legal issues or potential liability or repercussions or retaliation that y'all thought about in the making of the Mauritanian?
No, there were no legal issues. The Mauritanian was filmed in Cape Town. Turns out they make a lot of movies in Cape Town. There are places around the world that make a lot of movies, and that's one of them. They reconstructed everything, and they did it so well that when I saw that Guantanamo, I gasped. I literally gasped. And was holding Mohamedou's hand and said, "See, that's where you poked the little hole in the green stuff, so you could see me coming through." But they reconstructed it all there. They didn't. There was no government reprisal. There wasn't any. There wasn't anything in that film that hasn't come out publicly already.
Thank you. And what are the chances of the folks responsible for the U.S. torture program standing before the World Court? Say this person says John Yoo, Donald Rumsfeld et al. What are the chances, y'all? I mean, I already knew the answer.
Not good, not good. You know, they're in the United States. They're not going to be able to travel. I wouldn't want to travel to Europe if I were one of them, or any place that has universal jurisdiction. But they don't travel, you know, they take their grandkids to the Grand Canyon every year.
Gotcha. I'm going to direct this one towards you, Jim. Where do we begin with defeating the segregation environment inside of North Carolina prisons? So the use of solitary confinement in North Carolina.
Put fewer people in prison and put people in charge of them who care. You know, I think the way you change conditions is to make the people responsible care about the conditions. That's part of the problem with all of these things, is that, you know, the public either doesn't know about it, or if they know about it, you know, they don't make it a priority. And so nothing changes. You know, I think we need to make this stuff a priority to deal with these kinds of issues. I think, for example, when we talk about our system of justice, we are to include what we're doing in Gitmo and what we've done there as, you know, part of the system, as the definition of what our system is. I mean, this is sort of the point that Frank made at the very beginning. It's not what we say, it's what we do. And so, you know, let's accurately describe what our system is. And then if people don't like that, then they can change it.
I like it. I like it. So how much do you all think that the lack of information or misinformation that our children learn in school contributes to the wrongful conceptions regarding, you know, the prison industrial complex, the war on terror, the war on drugs? How much do you think mis and disinformation leads to folks' complicity around these issues?
I think that is one of the main reasons we're in the situation that we're in, whereas Mr. Coleman just stated, people don't care, they feel justified in their actions. I viewed a question in the chat that kind of said, you know, people on the ground are not following the rules and laws of war, and you would feel different if you were on the ground, and you know, and then these individuals, you would feel is justified to them. You know, what I think about when hearing a question like that is, are you familiar with the history of how we created a lot of these people, the things that we done to them? So with that understanding, shouldn't we be held to the same standard? Because how many innocent lives have we taken with drone bomb strikes? How many terrorists have we sent into other countries to unstabilize a government so that we can get regimes in and control their country the way that we want to, and so many other things. It's like, and I go back to this quote, you know, an injustice permitted anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we have to hold ourselves to the same standards that we would like to hold other people. And, you know, if you are a, you know, somebody who was part of the war and then they pick you up and they're torturing you, I don't think you're going to feel they're justified in how they're treating you. And I think that the miseducation plays a large role in it, you know, to where it, you know, makes America seem as if we've done nothing wrong ever, whether it was, you know, to people of color in America or to countries of color. And I think we have to start changing a lot of the narrative to really understand what brings a person to be willing to blow themselves up in order to inflict harm on you. You know, that's not just because we're America. Like, there's some reasons behind that. And me being a descendant from these countries, you know, I can't just view it as, oh, they deserve this, because these are my family. These are my you know, part of my relatives that we're talking about here, whether they're Muslim or whatever religion. You know, they're people of color, and America hasn't done right by countries of color and people of color in general. That does not justify terrorism at all. But I think that for us to really treat situations how they need to be treated, we cannot continue to hide a lot of the stuff that America does, you know, with these redacted CIA documents and FBI documents. And then you have these gaps in history. You have things that are not talked about. You have black ops, which we'll never know about the extent to what these are. And a lot of these black ops are, in essence, terrorist activity on foreign country, on foreign soil. And it's like, it's just, this cycle will continue to repeat itself. And, you know, from what I can understand, America has the most power. You know, we're like the bully in the situation a lot of times. So if we have the most power, we have the most power to create change as well. And, but I don't know, you know, I don't have all the answers, but I don't just look at things as so cut and dry as far as these individuals deserve torture, especially when they, even if they had been convicted of whatever crimes, there's a prescribed disciplinary action for that. And it does not involve waterboarding or beating or sexual humiliation. Like, those are against United Nations laws. So I don't care what they're convicted of, like, it's still not right. It's still wrong for us to do these things. It's been shown and proven that I mean, I was reading up, and one of the judges in Mohamedou's case, he wouldn't even convict him off of the information that they had received from torture because it was inadmissible. Like, so what was the point of you torturing and getting this information from this person? Simply because you enjoyed it, or it was revenge, or you felt justified in doing it. So it's like, what is the point? If you can't even use this stuff in court, like, even if you could, I still disagree with it, but you can't even use this in court. So at this point, like, what really is your motives to use these methods? You know, it's not justice. I'm sorry.
Say that, Rob. And I don't feed anonymous trolls. That's why I had ignored the question in the chat. Emily asked a very nice question. As previously mentioned, there are issues obtaining visas and passports after some of the prisoners have been released. Are there any actions being taken internationally to work on this issue? And or are there places that, my question, in addition to that, are there places that we can advocate for people to go that may have an easier process?
Well, I mean, I can speak to Mohamedou, and I think I mentioned this before. We're working on getting him a visa to the UK if possible, or to Germany. He would pretty much go anywhere. At the end of the movie, if you saw the movie, it asks if there's a country willing to take his family. He was able to go to South Africa, but it's a problem, I think, for all of them. Most of them, I think, I mean, the deal the US made with the most recent ones who got out under the Periodic Review Board procedure, which was not a court, it was a group of intelligence agencies who got together and had to unanimously decide that this person was not a significant threat to the US or its allies, which is how Mohamedou got out. But then the US made a deal with these countries, whether they were going home or going to be resettled somewhere, that they wouldn't get a passport for either 2 or 3 years. That was part of the deal. And Mohamedou got a passport on the 3-year anniversary of the day he got out. But then we believe the US is interfering with the countries about getting visas. You know, Europe, the European Union, most of those countries are what are known as Schengen countries because they're part of a treaty where they don't have any borders. So if he gets to Germany, he can get to a lot of other places. It's not so true with the UK because it's not Schengen. It's not even part of the European Union anymore. But this is part of the issue. The US, we believe, keeps feeding information to these countries. Someone in the US, we don't know who it is or who they are, is saying, well, he's still a security threat. Well, if he were a security threat, why did they let him out? This makes no sense. And when you've got the Home Secretary of the UK referring to Wikipedia as her evidence, it's really hard to overcome, folks. But we're trying. I mean, I've got lawyers all over the world working pro bono for Brahim, working pro bono for Mohamedou, bless their hearts. They're all working pro bono and trying to deal with all of these issues and dealing with them and helping him. And then that we hope will open it up for others.
Great. So somebody asked her, I think is a good question. Is the president the sole authority on what happens to Guantanamo, or is it the Attorney General, the Secretary of Defense? Who is it? Is it a clear cut on who has the authority, or is it like spread out authority to close Guantanamo?
Well, the president is the commander in chief, and the president can order any subordinate under the president to take action. And so ultimately, that's where the buck stops.
Okay, thank you for that, Frank. And then John Alexander asks, what do you think will be the fate of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was repeatedly tortured, but who has been criminally charged and has allegedly confessed to crimes, but only according to others?
Well, I mean, that's a difficult case. The five 9/11 defendants, some of them have confessed early on, and but you can't plead guilty to the death penalty under the Military Commission Act or most anywhere. So they're being tried. I don't know that the U.S. has legitimate evidence. And then there's the issue of the torture, which would come in under what sort of sentence should they serve. I just don't know what's going to happen to them. They have lawyers. I assume their lawyers are working on what will happen to them, but I'm not privy to what their decisions are.
Okay, and this is going to be our final question. Any chance of cases being redirected to the I can't ever say that word. How you say it, y'all? Hague. It always messes me up. Yeah. Hey, crimes against humanity. Any chances of those cases being redirected to the Hague for crimes against humanity?
You mean cases against the Americans for what they have done, or the cases against the Guantanamo detainees?
Let me clarify if she's still watching. I'm gonna assume she means any chances of the cases against the detainees being redirected.
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, y'all, she's saying either way. Okay, yeah. Or is there any chances of what's happening to the Americans?
Well, that's where the Hague is just a city. There are courts there. One of the courts is the International Criminal Court. That's where we do want to bring cases. As I said, Ibrahim is a victim and a victim of the CIA, and the CIA would be the defendants in that case. The prosecutor is pursuing it against members of the CIA and against the Taliban in Afghanistan for crimes against humanity. And it's in the investigation stage. It is where it goes, who knows, but how do they get them there? The ICC has no power to go out and arrest people. The most we can hope for is to get information from those cases, which help us in the Guantanamo cases of the people who are being tried, and to bring awareness.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists this evening. A lot of you all who have attended have asked, what can you do? And so I have put in the chat some things that you can do that we think that would be helpful. The first thing that you can do is you can contact Governor Cooper and Attorney General Josh Stein's office and ask them to not only publicly acknowledge the state's role in torture, but also to ask them to denounce its use and denounce our participation in those torture taxes. You can join the ACLU of North Carolina, of course, in general. There are also some events that we have coming up if you want to stay involved in what we're working on 3/31. We have a reproductive justice in carceral facilities. You can come and learn what's happening to pregnant and parenting folks and menstruating folks inside of North Carolina's jails and prisons and our response to those things. We have various petitions on our website, but also go to the Stop Torture Now. They have some actions on their website, and there you'll learn about the work that Christina and all of the commissioners, all the grassroots folks have done. There's also the North Carolina Commission on Institute on Torture, whose website you can visit. And now we're going to bring up Bruce Elmore from the Western North Carolina chapter of the ACLU. They were part of the reason that we had this event was because of their continued work to raise awareness about the use of torture and North Carolina's role in torture. And so we're just going to give a few minutes for Bruce to talk. Let me start your video there, Bruce. Let you unmute yourself as well. All right, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Kristie, and thanks to everyone on the panel. We at the Western North Carolina chapter were really honored to be able to co-sponsor this event. And if you live in Western North Carolina and you're not a member of the ACLU, join. If you are a member, I'd love for you to become involved in our chapter. Our board meets from 5:30 until 7 on the second Monday of every month. The board meetings are open to every ACLU member living here in Western North Carolina. And as with everything in the world now, our meetings are virtual. But as soon as COVID allows, we hope to have in-person meetings again. If you're a member and you want to attend one of the board meetings or become active in some other way, shoot me an email at elmore@theelmorelawfirm.com. That's Elmore, ELMORE, at elmorelawfirm.com. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing a lot of you at our future events.
I think once again, we hear the staff of the ACLU of North Carolina, myself, our executive director, Chantal Stevens, and all of our staff. Thank you so much for attending tonight, for your continued support. And thank you to all of our esteemed panelists for all of your knowledge. Thank you, Nancy, for joining. I know you've been on Zooms all day and y'all been doing stuff, trying to raise awareness about this movie. Thank you to Frank for beating into my head over the years why torture was an important conversation for us to have. And I appreciate you so much for doing that. Jim, thank you for all you do, helping get us, our people free. Rob, thank you for just always showing up and telling your story and being willing to throw down with us. And Christina, forever thank you for being the connector to make all of this happen. And thank you for your support. And to the Western North Carolina chapter and everyone else, thank you so much. Have a good night and we will see you. Email me if you would like, kwilliams@aclunc.org. If you would like to attend our next meeting on 3/31 about the use of the carceral facilities and pregnant folks. We don't want anti-abortion folks just showing up. So we're not just putting that thing out there. All right. And so I will talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Kristie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.